So let's start with you, Fred, on zero trust. There's a lot of talk about zero trust, and especially it seems like this is particularly applicable now that we're in the world of remote work, and with this year 2022 seems like, well, at least prior to my Omicron, that folks are starting to move back into the office, and so it generally seems that in today's remote and potentially and probably hybrid type of work environments, this becomes a concept that's important. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what that means for organizations, why zero trust as a framework is something that we should all consider, or the practicalities of why that's important for an organization?
So it's a good question. I think there's a handful of things that become more interesting now. Not only do you go through the digital transformation that's been happening for the last handful of years, you also sort of have a convergence with things like, okay, COVID slash work from home slash work from anywhere, that sort of moves around all of the organic components of what you have for a subject, a predicate, and object when you think about an access control model or something like this. I need to get to my mail. My mail server is no longer hosted in the office, right? Maybe it's O365, or I need to get access to this particular compute infrastructure. Well, that lives in AWS, okay? Or I have this specific application that I run, somewhere else that my company has licensed, and I have a method for doing that. So when we think about some of those constructs, what we used to suggest is those maybe weren't different before, but they're different now, because now we don't have a way to think about trusting a network component that we have a trusted network to provide, or a trusted identity in the sense that maybe it's a specific user or a system access that was available in this way. And then maybe it's something that we should consider around the devices we use to access things from. That used to be something important to us too, but now it's become very relevant. So when we think about some of those components, I think each of those in ways people deal with today, right? VPNs are not new, and when we think about what does it mean to have a secure system, well, people have understood this problem, and there's been CIS benchmarks, for quite some time now, for us to understand the complexities of how to harden an operating system to be successful in defending most of the hygiene type of vulnerabilities and risks we have there. And then there's also, how do we understand the data infrastructure or the systems that people are accessing as a function of that? And that gets back to the access control point that Chris made first. And I think that's probably the topical place for us to talk about where that becomes the interesting moment of between, working in Starbucks, working in your hotel room, working in in your office space, as is sort of like I'm here, I'm on premise or not, but I might also be hybrid, but I might not be me, right? And justification of how to validate those things.
Awesome. And so that's a great point. And so kind of passing it over to you, Chris. There's a lot of good things that zero trust incorporates, right, with today's environment. It also sounds like, after a year and a half, 2 years of COVID and remote work, that companies are already kind of doing zero trust like types of activity already. Can you talk to folks about that? Just some of the things that they're doing that already kind of sit into the realms, and what they might need to continue to improve upon as they go through this journey.
Yeah, so I really liked your analogy earlier about badge access, right? A lot of us were or are in companies that have transitioned from having an in-presence office, where my zero trust control was you have a badge, you swipe the badge, you're into the building, you're into the office, and that's where your computer stays, right? Maybe you don't take it home every day, or maybe you have another step. Okay, so your badge was stolen. How do I really know that person with that badge is you, right? Just because you swipe doesn't mean you are you, right? The person holding the badge. Maybe there's a PIN you have to enter, right? Depending how secure your facility is. Maybe you work with the DoD or something. So I think that's a really easy way for most folks to understand what does zero trust mean, and how does it apply to different systems, different access. Now we've lost that, right? I can't can't verify you're in your home, right? Or you're at a Starbucks or coffee shop nearby. So now what do I have to rely on? Your login, right? Your username and password. Okay, you should be the only one with your password, but if we look at password spraying attacks and password reuse, not everyone is using password managers yet. So now how do I verify what was your badge to get in the office, and now is your username and password to get into our corporate environment? That's where you see now the advent, which many years ago, multi-factor authentication. So now you get maybe a prompt on your phone or an email with a one-time passcode. So hopefully you're the only one in possession of your phone to give a little more trust in you are who you say you are when you're logging into the environment. You can take that a step further. Now applying controls to the endpoint, where that's kind of your last position of defense is, okay, is this device that this user is using to log into our environment, is this a known device? Is it authorized? You see new things coming up in VPN and CASB solutions where you're looking at the makeup of that system, right? Is there a cryptographic match, right? Are you using some type of key on the system to authenticate? Does it have your MDM installed? Does it have your antivirus installed or whatever endpoint protection product you're using? So that's where you start applying that zero trust principle, least privilege principle to a device and not the person, right? So you keep going down the line and go all the way down to the data layer, which is the concept I talk about a lot in the book. Is you start with the advantage you have over the attackers, which should be your data, right? The thing that they're going to go after. Your environment best. What is it that's valuable to an attacker in your environment? Start there and work your way out. So hopefully that's an easier way to wrap your head around like what is a very, I think, nebulous topic that gets thrown around a lot in marketing or even us as cybersecurity professionals, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And sorry, Fred, you were going to say something.
No, completely agree. Great analogy. The other thing I was gonna also offer is I think Chris made a really good point here. One of the important parts of understanding system and user is those combined things of system and user, right? And one of the questions I think people often ask is, when we talk about access control and identity, right? Is my identity the same strength? If it's just me logging into a public workstation, if it's me logging into my laptop, if it's me logging into my iOS device or my Android device, and then is there this multi-factor, and what are the strengths of multi-factor, right? Biometrics or what have you, to determine whether or not this is me, right? The authenticity of the authorization, right, in that sense. And there's something really a lot more relevant now than once was, I think, about these particular elements. And like the badge reflection, this is the case. Like that is your badge. That is what you have, right? That is what you are. And this is the process of you going through that from an identity perspective. And it's relatable to the devices that you identify from. So a very good point, Chris. Thanks.
Awesome. Hey, so we got our first question, Fred, and we've spoken a little bit about zero trust within the confines of your organization, but there's also some sense, right, like the ability to or at least the need to guard against third party, fourth party risk, right, things like that. And so a question that came in from our audience is how does zero trust work with folks or organizations or contractors or things like that are outside of your organization where you may not have as strong of a control, say, as your employees?
Yeah, so I'm actually somewhat draconian about this. So if you want to have access to said infrastructure, then I'm going to have to treat you like an employee. So what does that mean, right? You're going to be provided credentials in the same way, accountability in the same way. In our case, right, you're going to be on whatever device it is that you choose, whether we provision it or it's yours. You will have a Jump Cloud agent on it, and you will have policy audit around whatever device requirements we have. If it's a laptop, right, then you need to have EDR, as Chris brought up earlier, right? It's one of the things you check for, and make sure that you have things like your, encryption and standard set of password policies. And oh, by the way, probably have your firewall turned on, right? These kinds of very simple things, but also there's the rest of the things, like you're not using malware or things that are outside of our acceptable use policy. So the long and short of it is, if you want to basically have the access of an employee at JumpCloud, you'll be treated as such, like an employee, which means you go through all the same things from a policy perspective. You're provisioned in the same way. Your revocation happens in the same way, and your credentials are all tied to one identity, and your system is a part of that. So that's how we do it. I recommend that's how we do it. But Chris probably has an opinion on this too. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I really love this topic because I see it from both sides, right? If I was one of these vendors, would I want this random tool installed on my device, right? Now I've got to kind of go through the procurement process and do a review, if I have those mature processes in place for cybersecurity, not just from a technical standpoint, but from a contractual standpoint. So I think you've got a couple different options. I agree with Fred, right? It's either we'll provision you a device, or we're going to have something installed on your device. Of course, there's always exceptions, right? Running a business is about taking risks. There is no such thing as no risk, and it's our job to help the organization take the right ones at the right time. So, in those exception cases where, okay, maybe they won't install anything, maybe they won't use one of our devices, maybe it's too costly to provision or something, what do you have to rely on, right? You're going right back to that initial login, username and password, some type of MFA, and then stronger monitoring of that activity in whatever system they're using, right? Whether it's compute resources in GCP or AWS, or managing a database for you, something like that. Putting those wrappers around, like I'm sure everyone on this call has heard, cybersecurity is layers, right? And it all comes back to those layers, and applying zero trust at those layers as well, right? So let's say it's database access. You want to verify, okay, it is username and password. Having things like MFA, time-bound things, like is this person in a specific geo where they're going to be doing their work from a different time zone than where your organization is located. So you really have to kind of go beyond just the easy fixes, right? And that's, I think, part of our job in the organization, where we've got to enable them, and maybe we have to take risks that we don't like that much. But at the end of the day, I think that's all about running a business, right?
Those are both great points. I think the other thing that a lot of practitioners forget also is doing the basics well, right? Like, so for example, if you have a third party, you have a contractor, they join your organization, as much as it's important to onboard them, you should also offboard them once they're done, right? From whatever system, from whatever tools. And so just like doing the basics, well, that kind of fits within that zero trust, sort of a mentality. And so that's another thing that we can think about. I'll switch gears a little bit, right? Like, and this is, I think, a little bit towards the implementation, side of things with the zero trust. Like, when organizations, here's another buzzword that people talk about, and it's all about, passwordless. Like, when we get to passwordless, what happens then? Does multi-factor fit in? If so, what does that really mean? Let's start with you, Chris, right? Like, what are your thoughts about passwordless within the context of zero trust, and if it actually changes anything?
I'm definitely very excited about it. I think it's going to be a significantly better user experience. I think what we've built over the decades in cybersecurity has not been so user focused, and really taking into account that a human is going to be using these systems at the end of the day. I think things change where, okay, now now you just have a username, right? We're authenticating on different things on that device, right? So we already kind of see that on later model Apple MacBooks, right? You've got the Touch ID. That's how I log into my device 99% of the time, unless it's rebooted to apply a patch or something. That's passwordless right there, right? I don't think you can get any more basic. But now, because we're remote, I still have a username and password right to get into my email, to get to Google Drive or other systems. I think there's going to be more work that needs to go into identifying and trusting that device, right? So looking at a lot of other indicators of how you use the device, right? Behavioral things might be a little more complex for us as the defenders to use that system. But I think at the end of the day, it's really going to be a full industry effort. It's not going to be, there's a lot of products out there that sell this passwordless, but really to get there all the way to it, I think it's going to take, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Chromebooks, everyone's going to have to get on that bandwagon and remove username and passwords from their systems. But then how are you identifying, right? Is it with the camera? Are we doing biometrics? Depending where you work, maybe you can't have a camera in your laptop. Maybe you work in the DoD. I don't know how many folks on the call work in a SCIF or have worked in a secure compartmented and information facility. That's not going to fly there. So I think we're going to see new interesting challenges when it comes to passwordless. But I think in the long run, it's going to be a lot better for everyone, security in general.
Awesome. Yeah, and a lot of things are still the same, right? Like it's still one portion of Zero Trust is the authentication side, and what you do afterwards is similar. I think Fred, you also had a comment. Sorry, I think I cut you off there.
Yeah, no, it's so I think there's some concepts around how to establish an enclave, right? Today we have things like password managers, right? Where it's sort of an enclave in the sense where maybe some places have a master password, maybe not awesome, but basically what it means is that you can have some level of complexity for whatever the requirements are in the short term, rather than sort of defeat the purpose of the method of authenticity, right? And I think the trust model there is the interesting component that continues to change. And the more we start to tie and align things like devices with identity, then it becomes a lot more compelling to do exactly what Chris said, which is like, hey, this is interesting. I haven't seen you authenticate from this particular device before, and you're looking to access this particular resource. Let me step up the authentication requirements for you and really validate that it is you, right? Versus the notion of everything just being passwordless. I think the construct of being able to capture what is ease of use for people, and then also really sort of reduce as we begin to rely on more identity-based, authentication, is to be able to reduce the level of fraud associated with such, because biometrics are not a panacea to remediate that, as neither are MFA forms of authenticators or whatever the case may be, right? We have those challenges. So I think there's a set of parameters around sort of where we are now with the notion of password management, the notion of trust models that help us establish some brokered enclaves that allow us to step up or step down trust, given who an identity is. But we're a little bit out there from maybe purely passwordless everywhere. Like Chris said, I think there's an industry set of things that have to happen, adoption that has to happen before that can really be unified.
I just want to add on to the end there real quickly. I think there will always be resistance to this type of innovation. If anyone's familiar with large bank Charles Schwab, they put out something when you call, your voice is your password, so that's how you authenticate. You don't put in other information. I think that's really interesting. being on the defender attacker side, like, oh, well, someone could record me saying that and play it back. But really, what is the risk? And I think at the end of the day, we need to make sure we're not, slowing down innovation at the risk of some future vulnerability. There will always be vulnerabilities. That's just how it works, right? Humans are building all this. We're not perfect. So I think making sure we're pushing to get to passwordless, even though it might seem a little scary, like, well, how do you authenticate someone, right? Everything we just talked about. I think we have to remember that that's something we're always going to be solving is what's the next vulnerability, right? And really what the risk is.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.